All right, so this was a crazy reading.
Yeah.
This was wild.
You're trying to incite some kind of rebellion, aren't you?
I am? I don't think it's me. I didn't write it.
Yeah, that's true. Marcuse.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Did you read the which version did you read?
Yeah, so I had found something else. I found a standalone, but yeah, we're reading Repressive Tolerance by Herbert Marcuse.
Right.
Or Marcuse. I keep saying Marcuse.
Every time you say Marcuse, I think J'accuse.
Well, that's exactly it, I think. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, yeah. It sounds French. That's why I say it like that.
Right.
Anyway.
Oh, so I posted your consciousness.
Yeah,
thing
I know.
to
Nobody
Reddit,
liked it. We said
nobody liked it, but
yeah,
it didn't get a whole lot of bites.
Well, a lot of the responses were like, "Yeah, this is obvious," which I kind of agree. I mean, yeah,
sure.
But my point is more that because it's so obvious, I think he could be doing it in more direct terms. Because it does seem obvious to anybody who's, I think, reading it and understands where he's coming from, which was one of the Reddit posts was saying, this is all out of Hegel and Kant and everything like that. So,
right.
Of course, it's directed to the mind in some sense. But he could be doing it in more concrete terms. But he talks about consciousness in this too, which we'll talk about.
I'm still not. It's not obvious to me. It seems wrong to me.
Well, he explicitly talks about consciousness in this. It's
right, but he means awareness. Like he's talking about like awareness of problems.
No, it's awareness of yourself as a free-thinking individual. That's his end goal. That's what he keeps talking about, and that's what the pacification is. I think and that's what like the true democracy is. It's people who are autonomous thinking individuals, which are in some sense highly conscious, enlightened, whatever term you want to use, but they're very aware. They're not only aware of their knowledge, they're aware of the context of their knowledge. That's the big thing he emphasizes in this.
Okay.
The context. The system, man. The system that the knowledge comes from, man.
Sure. Okay,
Anyway.
So how would you summarize this essay?
Oh, yeah. I would summarize it as, well, so it's repressive tolerance, right? So I would summarize it. I think his ultimate goal is to introduce the idea of discriminating tolerance and replacement of the military/business oligarchy with an intelligentsia oligarchy, or at least an oligarchy that, or at least, again, the goal is a purely like autonomous, true democratic society where people are completely free. But he says an intelligentsia oligarchy would be preferred to the current one, which is kind of interesting, and we'll talk about that. And he says that, in the end, he does say a true democracy where everybody is free, self-determining individual is ultimate goal. Ends with a call for action for the minorities to be intolerant of the rules of behavior because these are repressive. And I think the phrase that really sums it up is tolerance is a partisan goal. But yeah, so discriminating tolerance is another way to sum it up nicely. I think that's kind of what he's saying. He's saying that in order to, you should be intolerant, actually, to systems that are anti-human and repressive, as he keeps saying.
Right.
So he's basically saying his thesis is that there are times to be intolerant, and the times to be intolerant are to repressive.
Now.
Well, it's to repressive systems, which, he deems the United States.
Well, he says that
as.
the current system is demanding intolerance, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Viva la revolution. Okay, so, how would you summarize this?
I mean, I think similarly. I think that the idea is that his notion of repressive tolerance is tolerance in the face of a regressive society is actually regressive in and of itself and supports the entrenched system that is negative. And so in the face of that, one is called upon to not be tolerant of that system and all of the facets of that system. So not be tolerant of education systems, not be tolerant of media or social structures or really anything. And then also the call to fight against it is to be proactively violent.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
And an offensive move is a progressive move, right?
Right. Yeah, and he keeps talking about that's a good point, because he has a whole thing about the violence thing and talking about how, let's not compare a movement that is I guess you could say a revolutionary movement versus a repressive movement, I guess, or something, or a restrictive or reactionary.
Right, exactly.
Reactionary movement.
Because there's a difference between progressive and reactionary.
Yeah.
And the right, as he keeps calling it, are sort of by definition reactionary, and the left are by definition progressive. So things that push in a leftward direction are good and progressive, and it is okay to enact violence in the name of pushing it in that direction, or to engage in propaganda, or to engage in revolutionary education systems, things like that.
Yeah, I had this on page 9 as a particularly bloodthirsty quote. In terms of historical function, there is a difference between revolutionary and reactionary violence, between violence practiced by the oppressed and by the oppressors. In terms of ethics, both forms of violence are inhuman and evil, but since when is history made in accordance with ethical standards?
Right.
To start applying them at this point, where the oppressed rebel against the oppressors, the have-nots against the haves, is serving the cause of actual violence by weakening the protest against it.
Right.
And I have, and my note is, I bet he would support Palestine.
Yeah, right. Probably.
Well, and then I looked up what his stance of Israel, in the 60s was, and it was essentially that Israel shouldn't be seizing more land.
Right.
That was his stance. And he was a German Jew, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Let's just all remember that.
Let's all remember that.
He's allowed to say these things.
He is? Oh, that's
I'm just being cheeky.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, so that would be my summation of it, is essentially that the idea of tolerance in our current society is essentially a scheme to uphold the current right-wing establishment, the regressive power, which is inhumane, and that the move is to fight against that in a variety of social ways, like through a variety of social means, including education, including identity revolution, including violence, and including propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, so it's just very interesting.
I mean, you can see, when I read this, I see exactly, I can get from here all the way to, Ibram Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's exactly the same.
Well, and I was going to say, the reason I was thinking about the Palestine stuff is you have a lot of people that are wondering, how are these protests going on, and where, where it's because this is what everybody believes in the academia. I mean, I would say this. Wouldn't you agree that this philosophy is, I would say, critical theory?
Uh-huh.
And these principles underlie a lot of the liberal arts education these days.
Yeah. I think they underlie almost all education these days. Right.
So why are we surprised then when we see these protests? That's my point. It's this is his right. There are people.
Right. Well, yeah. Who's
people
surprised?
People are saying, Antushka. People are saying, I don't. Just the amorphous people out there.
Most people are probably afraid of true revolution.
Well, yeah, because I mean, it's striking this balance between there's a bunch of BS that you have to put up with society, but it is always that question of what's the alternative. Because how bad does it have to get before you're okay with just complete chaos?
Right. I mean, his alternative is that nobody has to work.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's a nice alternative.
Yeah, if we just get rid of these stupid regressive right wingers, we can stop working.
But
it'll be fine.
More beyond the, I guess you could say, prevalence of this ideology in the universities, you can also see how it has also become prevalent in the bureaucracy of our state.
Well, this is the whole thing. I mean, the entrenchment of these ideas, because
the governing intelligentsia is what I mean.
Yeah, but because
he calls for it, and
goes
that's what
all the way
have.
down through elementary education.
Right.
These ideas, I would say, are entrenched in our entire education system,
right.
which is the system that then spits out everything else. So every plumber, every firefighter, every doctor, every NASA scientist, they have all gone through this education system teaching this.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess I don't know if I agree. Because, I went to public school my whole life in the 90s and 2000s.
It was less entrenched at that time. But
yeah. Okay. I mean, that's part of my issue, though, is I really don't know what they're teaching. I know what they're teaching at the university level, and this is why I'm also saying is I know what's happening in the bureaucratic state, and by that I mean, the executive branch, I suppose, of the U.S. government, is that you can see this governing intelligentsia class is exactly what sort of Marcuse's vision was. It was kind of interesting. He has this part where he's very explicitly talking with an elitist attitude about how the people that are governing things, it would be preferred to have people who are at least intelligent, right, to some level, versus like these dopey military people that are running things, in the 60s when he was writing. I mean, he's talking about that. But it's interesting because I would say we have that now, and you look at the state of things. Things are more unstable than, they're about as unstable as they were in the 60s when you had the dopey military class.
But
running things.
I don't even know if the military class was controlled. Because
but I
the
just
Vietnam War is one of the first wars in American history that was dictated by Congress.
Wait, hang on though. Let me just finish the point. Sorry, I am hogging the mic. I apologize.
No. Keep going.
But all I just want to say is I think this is just important to remember that we have both sides of these people that are ruling things, and in both cases you had to take the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s when as he calls them the military people were running things, or you take now where I would say we're getting to a I don't know, a lot of people are talking about nuclear war these days, right? So things feel unstable. And you definitely have an intelligentsia class that runs things. This is how you get to the higher reaches of the executive branch, and really all the branches, is you go to the Ivy Leagues, you go to the meritocratic levels, right? And which is what Marcuse is sort of advocating for in this. That's all my point is. Sorry. Okay.
I don't think he is. I think that actually Marcuse would support an unstable structure because stability will only serve to protect the entrenched system. Revolution is by definition destabilizing.
Well, I'm not saying that sorry, I guess you're right. That was an ambiguous thing to say. I'm not saying that he would like the structure, but I'm saying that I think that he would like it more than the 60s because it has that class of people running it. That's kind of all my point is.
Oh, yeah.
I think he would still
there's
want
more leftists entrenched or something.
Yeah,
like that.
yes,
but he
exactly.
doesn't like the Soviet Union either.
Yes, I know. I mean, he would. Here's the important point: he wouldn't like any of them, right?
But this is where downstream from him, just 2 decades later or a decade later, we get in the critical theory movement the explicit idea of perpetual revolution. And you can see how you get from one to the other because the problem is every entrenched system becomes conservative and reactionary. And so you always have to be revolting.
Which, don't you think that kind of is a isn't that really just Mikel's iron law of oligarchy in play?
Well, it's an
system,
attempt to fight it.
Well, no. But it's if every system becomes conservative. In some sense, I'm thinking of that as an oligarchy, I guess. Maybe it's a stretch.
Conservative as in wanting to maintain itself and not change.
Yes,
yeah.
Which I think is what kind of an oligarchy does. An oligarchy tries to consolidate and continue to monopolize and stabilize.
Right.
As does everything, but yeah. Anyway, I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting.
Right. But this is where, and like he has a little bit on identity. And you can even see how... like queer studies and things like that comes out of this, and
the identity thing was confusing.
The idea of a personally defined and a destabilized identity allows for a perpetual revolution, because you aren't anything. You are whatever it is you need to be politically at the moment. Your identity is a political tool.
Yeah.
To serve the revolution.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. Like reading this, it's like this is like, because I've read How to Be an Anti-Racist. I've read like critical. I don't remember who wrote it. I don't remember her name, but like towards a critical feminism, and it's just like it's crazy. It's like exactly the same. It's all the same arguments. They just swap out words here and there. Right.
But you know what's interesting is I actually feel like this is kind of similar to like some of your arguments too, though.
Yeah. You're right. They start off in a similar spot, but then they veer dramatically.
Yeah, I have on page 13 a quote that I feel like sounds like Rose Wilder Lane. He says, "More than ever, the proposition holds true that progress and freedom demands progress in the consciousness of freedom." And so that's the whole idea of like Rose Wilder Lane kept saying that, and this is how I also keep saying I think he's ultimately talking about consciousness and being more aware. He's saying you have to be aware of the system you're in and be aware that you are a free-thinking individual and you're not an automaton, and to break out of the indoctrination and, propaganda that you've been fed your whole life. So I think it's interesting because it's like, doesn't that kind of sound like what Rose Wilder Lane's saying? Is like you have to realize you can control your energy, right? She kept talking about that.
I think so. I just think that he's not being honest with himself. Because the world that he's talking about is not free people. He's talking about cogs in a revolution machine.
Well, he keeps maintaining that it seems his end goal is a society where people are independent thinkers that are basically free independent thinkers.
Right. I just think he's dumb then. Like it's just like
but doesn't that sound like what you want?
I don't care if people are free independent. My thing is I don't care what other people do, and I don't want them to care what I do. That is the be all. That is the basis of it. Is I don't want to control other people, and I don't want them controlling me. That's the starting point.
Sure.
It's not that I have a vision for what I want society to look like. That's like I don't care.
Yeah.
He cares very much what other people are doing. Like, this is the thing, is you read, it is definitely going to lead to, like, tyrannical dictatorship. Of course.
I agree.
Why did it happen in Cuba and Venezuela and China and North Korea? And it's not like they just did it wrong all these times. Every time they do it wrong and there's millions of people who die. Well, stop doing it.
Well, to be fair, I don't know how aware that stuff was, like, ongoing when he was writing. This was in 1965 that he wrote. So, like, they weren't, my understanding is that they weren't completely aware of all like the millions that were dying in China and the Soviet Union.
Sure. I mean, yeah, because what's his name? Noam Chomsky denied the Pol Pot.
Exactly.
And all that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sure, but he talks about later in the 60s not liking the Soviet Union, not being for their what they're doing, and if he was involved with the OSS. I don't know if he was still involved with the CIA in the 60s, but they certainly had some awareness of Castro and what was going on because they were trying to start a war with him.
Though I feel like I don't know if he was involved with the CIA. It was a very, very like shrouded affiliation, because I feel like there was a part in this where he came out against kind of the police state.
Well, the FBI was after him. So as far as my understanding of Marcuse's history, he was working with the OSS, but the FBI was investigating him. But the FBI and OSS were not cooperative at the time. I think that they, in some ways, are still not.
Yeah, the CIA and the FBI, they've always been at a head. Not that I know anything about this.
Right.
I don't. Okay. I'm looking at my notes. I'm trying to think. Authentic liberals protest against the tyranny of the majority. I have this as a question mark.
Right.
Tolerance of the moralization of children done in society. Okay, yeah. He claims a dialectical proposition is that the whole which determines the truth uses this to make the point that in a society that's repressive, every movement is therefore repressive, even the progressive one. So that's you were saying that. It's like basically even progressive movements in a repressive society are repressive.
Right. Yep.
Because everything is infected and with that or whatever, it contaminated. Function and value of tolerance depends on the prevalence of equality in a society. So that was an interesting point. He keeps making that is also a little interesting. And a little bit later on, he talks about how here's another on this point and on the previous point I was making, how everything he's calling for, I feel like, has happened. He has on page 14, I think, in his in his end section, he says, in the United States, this tendency goes hand in hand with a monopolistic or oligopolistic. That's how I would say it. Within the monopolistic and oligopolistic concentration of capital in the formation of public opinion, i.e. of the majority. The chance of influencing in any effective way this majority is at a price in dollars totally out of the reach of the radical opposition. Here, too, free competition and exchange of ideas have become a farce. The left has no equal voice, no equal access to the mass media and their public facilities.
Right.
Not because a conspiracy excludes it, but because, in good old capitalistic fashion, it does not have the required purchasing power. And the left does not have the purchasing power because it is the left.
Right.
So, I mean, that's completely the opposite now, obviously.
Well, but big critical theory people don't think so. They think it's still true.
Well, right. It's a good point. It's they would probably say it's still a deceptive version of the left that's being
like it's not really
portrayed.
The left.
Yes, exactly. But certainly they call themselves the left.
Yeah.
When you look at, it's like just taking the big three news networks. I mean, you have MSNBC, CNN, and Fox.
Right.
Though they're going out of style, you have a 2-to-1 thing.
But
right,
but a lot of
conservative
hardcore
and liberal.
leftists call them right-wing media.
Yes, but
it's like the idea that
yes, but a lot of hardcore everybody's going to take extreme views like that. But looking at the majority of what people would classify it as, majority of people would classify MSNBC and Fox.
The majority of people in the U.S. would.
Yes.
But like if you start asking people in
the
Europe,
world.
they say that there are no left-wing people in the U.S.
Everybody in Europe
not
says
everybody,
that?
and not like every last person. It is a common description of the U.S. And actually, when I did that Reddit question about what is left, right, capitalism, socialism, people from Europe had a different perspective, and a lot of them would say that liberalism, like what we in the U.S. call left of center, they say is all right of center. So there's anything that is liberal is right of center.
Yeah. I see your
because
point.
anything that believes that private property has some legitimacy is right of center.
Right. Or values, I guess you could almost say the individual, too.
Right.
I feel like that's often put in right-wing categories.
Yeah, exactly. Individualism and private property. So from their perspective, our Democrats and our left party is right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I could see that. But in the way that he's conceiving it, in some sense, I agree
think
that
he would conceive
probably
it similarly.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. But I would push back and say that there are many... Sorry,
you should be sorry.
It's my fault. I'm causing chaos. Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is the essence of his teachings are there. You know what I mean? I mean, because again, for all the reasons we said, is you see the things that are portrayed, it is an emphasizing of the downtrodden, which, you know, on the face is good, right?
Right. But then we get into problems is, who is he saying is downtrodden? How does he know they're downtrodden? And how does he know what the best remedy for this situation is?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Right, because most people, it's this thing. It's what he's done the whole time, and it drives me crazy. Is he takes this word like tolerance, and then he gives it kind of a special meaning, and then argues against it, and then he even says there's a weird paragraph where he says that the modern repressive society has sort of shifted the definition of tolerance in an unfair way. But what did it used to mean? Yeah. What is he talking about? It seems like he just doesn't like it. I think
he's talking about how. Wait,
so he
say it
says
again.
The political locus of tolerance has changed, where it is more or less quietly and constitutionally withdrawn from the opposition. It is made compulsory behavior with respect to established policies. Tolerance is turned from an active into a passive state, from practice to non-practice.
Oh, he's saying how you allow the opposition to fester, but you contextualize it in the vocabulary.
It's making the revolutionaries impotent.
Yes, but you're allowing them to be expressed, which is why it's like a passive tolerance, I think. I think.
But what is an active tolerance?
An active tolerance, I guess doing something to facilitate it?
Yeah, I don't know.
To
me, tolerance essentially means putting up with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You're right, because it's like you say these things and you're like, okay, I think that makes sense, and then you think about it and you're like, well,
it's not
does
that
that
it doesn't make sense. It's his statement. I can understand it sort of
in a few ways.
I can understand the actual meaning of his words. I just think that he's being revolutionary. He's being deceitful with his language.
Yes. Yeah. You're right. He's being very passive.
Yeah. I don't know.
I was actually reading this. I was more annoyed with him than with the one-dimensional man. This was I was actually finding myself annoyed with him in this one, for sort of similar reasons that you're talking about. Is that I feel like he could have, first off, made this article much shorter. The point was, it did not need to be this long. And his sentences are just so confusingly written. And honestly, I think it is a bit of a German style, because I have a friend who speaks German. We talk about this a lot, of how in German it is common to have you almost don't know what they're talking about until the end of the sentence. So you put the subject at the end. So I think that's done a lot here in a lot of German philosophy too, which is, I think, one of the things that makes it kind of more difficult to read. But I don't know, just something about his sentence structure like with that, and plus just I don't know, something else. It was just very like I just found myself very confused with this one. And I mean, I can bring up an example. I mean, even just the last sentence, I was like, this is just such a horrible sentence.
You should have been his editor.
But look, well, I'm like kind of in the Hemingway school where I was like, I think if you can like do multiple short sentences, it just helps with the readability. This is one sentence. It's like 8 lines, you know? The tolerance, which is the life element, the token of a free society. Oh, and the commas that he uses, the way he uses the commas. The tolerance, which is the life element, comma, the token of a free society, comma, will never be the gift of the powers that be. And then colon, semicolon. It can, under the prevailing conditions of tyranny by the majority, only be won in the sustained effort of radical minorities, willing to break this tyranny and to work for the emergence of a free and sovereign majority. Minorities intolerant, militantly intolerant, and disobedient to the rules of behavior which tolerate destruction and suppression. I mean, just a horrible sentence. I'm sorry.
I just think he's
like I get what
he's just dismantling the meanings of these words. It's similar. I used to have this argument with people in college.
Well,
what?
Yeah. Sorry. Well, yeah. I was just going to say I think you're right, but I think it's also more simply kind of what you're saying is like he's saying this very revolutionary statement, which is saying minorities that are being suppressed should be revolutionary. But he's doing it in this long-winded 8-line sentence that, like, you're like at the end of it, you're like, what are you saying?
I think it all has to do with this thing. I notice it on Reddit when Marxists and critical theorists respond. There's this idea that the reason to push for this pacified existence is that is the most rational usage of human energy, essentially. And so they have defined that, you know, the Marxist outlook on life is the most rational way to live. And so they must be able to create a rational argument to get themselves there. And that it is, you know, that humans are by definition irrational. And then they create some like pseudo-rational structure to envision this society that they want or that they believe is the most rational or something like that. And really what we're talking about at the baseline is kind of preferences.
Yes.
Definitely. So we're trying to make the irrational rational.
Yeah, and we're trying to mold people, to your point, into seeing a world that we want them to see, or they want.
But this whole tolerance thing ends up being meaningless because he talks about in the pacified world, tolerance is this wonderful thing, but there is no. It's like saying in heaven, tolerance is good. There's no need for tolerance in heaven. What are you tolerating?
Well, what do you think of that statement that he has that, you know, tolerance is a partisan goal?
Yeah, I think that he is correct that an entrenched system is going to resist revolutionary action against it. Like, duh. So I think he's right about that.
Yeah.
But that's true of every system. You know, if we want to change how we teach mathematics and we change from the old system to new math and from new math to Common Core or whatever, people get pissed every time. And there's probably some things gained and some things lost with each shift.
Right.
That doesn't mean that the change is by definition good or bad.
Right.
And this is where I start to get annoyed because when he talks about free speech and things like that as ways of sort of making people believe that they have this freedom while ultimately bolstering the system, and how actually in an oppressive system we cannot tolerate hearing ideas that are sort of that push negative consciousness or false consciousness, right? But this is where it's like, this is crazy then, because either then we have to say that you're the prophet and you know the right way to go. Otherwise, how are we going to know what all the options are? Like, we need to know what all the options are, good and bad, and then we need to figure out what it is we want. And pretending that you're doing something rational. This is where it annoys me. Is it's like, you're not my prophet, so I don't care what you think.
I think he kind of addresses that, though, and that's why I think one thing to remember is, again, in the 60s, the power balance was, I think, more toward the conservatives. And by that, I mean people who would call themselves conservatives had more of the power in, like, D.C. and of the apparatus that is the U.S. government than now, whereas I think you would have more people that hold the power would call themselves socialists or progressives at like the State Department. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
I guarantee it. Well, I guess ultimately what I'm trying to say is I do actually think you guys both agree on, I think that you do actually want people to be more conscious and aware.
I see.
You say that you don't care.
It's not that I don't want it. It's that I have no desire to enforce it.
No, but I guess what I'm saying is I feel like for your system to work, you kind of need people to be like that. Because, and this is actually an interesting point that he keeps making a little bit and John Stuart Mills makes, is that they keep making this distinction in the individual between, I guess, the barbarian and the intellect. And then there's a spectrum between the two. But they're like saying you can have a true democracy if everybody is an intellectual. But, you know, John Stuart Mill talks about how you actually should govern a population of barbarians despotically. And so what I'm saying is, in some ways, you know, I don't know if you should do the despotism, but in some ways I agree about the democracy, and this is where I think a lot of people agree because they talk about having a well-informed public. Like, you need a public that has a certain level of education for a democracy to work. And so he's very right about pointing out the Moranization and stuff like that. But I also think you need a educated population for an anarchistic organization to work.
You need a what, say again?
If that's even a thing. An anarchistic organization. For an anarchistic organization to work, if that even exists, is that an oxymoron? I don't know. You said that you're not against organizations, right?
Now, I'm not like an atomist. I don't want every human to be like an island.
Yeah. I guess I'm just saying that I think that you'll require a certain amount of education of a population for anarchy to exist, because you need people to understand the idea of empathy and like property to some extent and staying in civility.
Yeah, but I think that
which I think requires
that's all easily
education.
done. I mean, I'm listening to an interesting podcast
well, it's not, though.
A guy who grew up in Gaza in the 50s in the West Bank when it was controlled by Jordan. And there was no government. They had no electricity. They had no running water. They had no police. They had no public education. They had nothing. And they had functioning societies where people learned how to farm. They mostly did subsistence farming, and they had, they'd walk to a market an hour away. All of these things existed. Yeah. And they didn't even need police until things started to get bigger, and the world of the rest of the world kind of became part of their world.
No, I think you just hit the nail on the head, though. I think the bigger is probably a big thing about it. As the population scales, you get a bunch of other issues. And again, Mikkel talks about this, is having a democracy in a small group.
But they weren't
is actually very easy and kind of makes the most sense.
They're just a village.
Well, it's just it's a village that I would say probably ruled itself through some sort of collaborative process of, like, everybody had a say, right? It wasn't, I imagine, a despotic,
I don't think there was any government regime. So the way he was describing it is that, like, people,
but there was somebody had a cow
and they could sell their milk, and somebody grew food, like they had like olive trees and stuff like that.
But if issues, so no
I don't
issues
know
ever
that
occurred.
no issues ever
You're saying it was a
occurred. I'm
complete
saying that
utopia. That's what I'm saying. Is there was going to be there was some superstructure that the society lived in. I feel like you're not telling me all the details that are necessary for this. It's like I'm sure there was some sort of governing status, and all I'm saying is that it was probably a democratic.
Maybe I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, because
anyway,
like the rule of Jordan wasn't democratic, and so like there were weird rules from
and
the Jordanian government.
And what I'm saying is population size is an important thing. As cities and organizations scale, you get a whole bunch of other issues. You get cheaters in the system. I mean, there's a whole question in biology as just a fundamental philosophy. If you'll always have quote cheaters in a biological system, because you could define that at the scale of a parasite or a bacterium within another cell or something, or a virus. So I think as populations scale, you're going to get more issues like that, which are going to require some kind of organization and communication between people. Anyway, I don't even know what we're talking about anymore, why we're talking about this. We keep getting on the anarchy stuff. All I was trying to say is that I think, to have a population that will exist peacefully requires a certain level of consciousness, I guess is really what I'm trying to say. And I think that's what, awareness, consciousness of oneself and one's surroundings.
I mean, I think to survive, you'll need consciousness of yourself and surroundings, not even in a society. If you were by yourself in the forest, you would.
Well, it helps,
I
which
just
is
don't
why
even see how it would be possible to survive without it. Because you're not going to know if you're going to fall off a cliff. I mean, you would say, you're not even aware of yourself.
Well, supposedly we survived without consciousness for many thousands of years before it developed.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
You know what I mean? You think that humans are always conscious?
Yes, to a degree. I don't know. Like,
I don't know.
I don't know about when we're talking about 100,000 years ago what humans were like. I have no clue. I would say in all recorded history, humans seem about the same to me. Like, it doesn't seem like we're significantly more conscious than we were 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, no. I guess I'm talking about ancestral.
I mean, I don't think it's
like
possible
even
to survive without some level
before
of
Homo sapiens and whatnot. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, now we're getting into very, very off from Marcuse, but yeah. I guess it's related because I guess what I think he's saying is that you want a hyper-conscious society, because hyper-conscious societies are going to be empathetic and more peaceful and everything like that. And I think you want that as well. It sounds like from our conversations. I guess that's all I'm trying to say. But you would disagree with that, it seems. You don't care about, you don't think consciousness matters.
It's not that I don't think it matters.
In other people.
I have a preference. Like, I like the idea of the people I talk to be aware so I can have interesting conversations with them. And I would like people to, other people in the world to be suffering as little as possible. And so empathy helps with that, because it's much harder to bomb people if you think about the fact that you're sending like little shards of metal to go tear into people's bodies than if you're just like mad and just bombing. So I agree. I think all of those things are helpful for the stuff that I want.
Yeah.
But I don't believe in I don't believe that if we were all just conscious enough, it'd be fine and like we wouldn't have to work.
Yeah. Well, I think I would agree with that. Because that's where I also kind of depart from Marcuse's. I don't know if I take your stance where I think labor is inherently good, but I think it's just a fact of life.
I think it's part of it. I think of it as a pseudo-religious belief of mine, where it's the human condition versus the condition of God or heaven or whatever. Because when I read Marcuse's Pacification of Existence, I think he's talking about heaven, sort of. And when you're drawing it towards consciousness, that makes me think of it more. Because if I think about the idea, like what we were just talking about, I say I think you need some level of consciousness to survive. I can draw that back to religion too, that God is consciousness and God is the life giver.
Right.
Right? And this is all very like mythological, kind of like a mumbo jumbo way of putting it, but it's kind of a narrative way of thinking about it. That God is the life giver, that is the source of consciousness. And so the idea of pursuing consciousness to as maximal a position as possible, that is heaven, because that is the reunification with God. And I'm saying that the human condition is not capable of creating heaven. Heaven can only be created by God. So what humans can do is exist within the life that they have been given.
Well, yeah,
and
but
I think
again,
Marcuse is trying to suggest that humans can create heaven.
Yeah.
He's trying to rationalize a way in which humans can create heaven. And I don't think that's possible.
Yeah. Well, but it's interesting because, again, I think in that sense he's more of a sort of individualist and maybe even more in line with Rosewater Lane than you are, whereas he thinks that the vast capabilities of human consciousness are able to create a heaven on earth. Because our ingenuity, which is brought out from our consciousness to make all these technologies, again, all the technologies are because of consciousness, will allow the abolition of labor if we lean completely into consciousness.
His system that he thinks is like a dictatorship. It's a centrally planned system where these minorities are being helped. And then it's like, what minorities are you talking about in this world?
No, I agree. I wasn't disagreeing.
Right. I don't know. I don't think he is an individualist. I know he talks about individual liberty, but I don't think he means the same thing that I do.
Yeah, I mean, in this sense, so I guess what you're saying is maybe he's being deceptively an individualist. It sounds like he's an individualist, but in reality, what he's proposing, like you say, sounds like a dictatorship.
It is a form of collectivism, yes.
Right. Yeah. Well, it definitely is a form of collectivism, but that's why, whereas your anarchic society sounds kind of like a form of collectivism, too.
Okay.
But anyway, it's okay. I'll stop hammering this home.
I mean, it's fine. I'm happy to talk about it.
We'll call it the Antushka Society. It's going to go down in history.
Right. It's collectivist. Right. Status, Stephen.
Status, God forbid.
Yeah, like if I kind of secretly love Mao and all that.
So it's funny. I really tore into him on that sentence. I don't know, though. It's just like something about sometimes when I read these, because, like, look, don't get me wrong, I've written long sentences. I don't think ever that long, but, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll get off the sentence.
Right. I don't know. I think there's two major language beefs that I have with it, and I think I see it more clearly. Kendi does it in a clearer way because I think he's not as what's the word? He's not as good at embedding it, but he'll start off with something like racism is bad, and we all go like, yeah, that sounds right, and then he has a very particular definition of racism that shifts what we would think about it. And then he says, and we must do whatever we can to fight racism. And so everybody's kind of agree with both ends of it. And he's done a little thing in the middle where he's defined racism as something completely different than what anybody else had thought about it previously.
Right.
And it's this way of gaining a whole lot of support because what you're saying comes off as relatively reasonable because each end of the sandwich is pretty easy to agree with. And you've done a weird little shift in the middle about what it is you're really talking about. And I notice it when he talks about how the right tries to change the meanings of words, talking about how war is peace and things like that.
Right,
and what I think is that the battle against this is kind of like what I'm trying to do on Reddit, is it doesn't matter what somebody means by peace. What does it look like? What are they talking about?
Yes.
Are they talking about killing people or are they not? And if they call killing people peace, whatever.
Yeah, who cares? Yeah. It's a bad definition of peace.
Sure, I agree. But I think that like his definition of tolerance isn't a very good one either. And his definition of
and then he has-
violence is weird too. I noticed that because when I think of violence, and I think of like a violation, because he talks about how the police enact violence, and then he's being a little narrow-minded there, because from the system's perspective, the police really don't enact violence. The violation has happened, and the police are defending the violated. And from his perspective, the police are enacting violence because the system itself is violent.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree.
And then it's like, then we're just arguing who's right and who's wrong again.
Well, I completely agree. And this was, again, another thing I was also thinking about that was frustrating and does seem to be a general trend, is that they will redefine very common words like tolerance, like, qualitative and quantitative.
Right. Yes.
And it almost feels like, I mean, look, there are reasons to label things within any discipline. But it's like sometimes you gotta like ask, is this also just a way for you to shroud yourself away from other people so that nobody outside of your circle can understand? That then you can easily dismiss any arguments against it. Because you've jargonified it.
Right.
Or, again, it's easy to detect. I mean, this is, not necessarily a bad thing, because in some ways you do want to know if your opponent if you're called an opponent, has understood your argument. Is, one way to tell is if they understand the definitions of words that you use. Or if you can pronounce them correctly, or even say the person's name correctly.
But that's what makes critical theory an interesting movement, because actually I don't think from Marcuse's perspective it matters if your enemy understands what you mean. It actually only matters if the people on your side understand.
Right, exactly. Which is why it's, in some ways, it's probably done. I mean, you could say that it's done on purpose. I don't know. I mean, in history is just scattered with examples of secret societies, not even secret, just societies of people who come together and, you develop your own language almost just without even thinking about it. Like us. I'm calling you Antushka. What the heck does that even mean?
Some serious jargon right there.
That's a jargon right there, yeah. Buddy got a fat neck,
Yeah.
Anyway. So yeah, but the point is, he was part of the Frankfurt School, which was just a group of bros, just broing about in Frankfurt. And
not even really in Frankfurt for very long, but
no, they weren't. Yeah, just the late 20s, early 30s.
Even their time in Germany, I think, was more in Berlin and Cologne.
Yeah. Well, I just know that Marcuse, I think he left Germany in 33 or something. Yep. Yeah, oh yeah, I got Being in Time. I started trying to read it. And by the way, so this is definitely, talk about long-winded, man. I mean...
What you got? What? What are we... What?
Okay, so sorry, yeah. Heidegger, who was basically Marcuse's thesis advisor, so highly influential. Heidegger wrote of maybe one of the most influential philosophical texts of the 20th century called Being in Time. And this was something I think that Marcuse read and inspired him to, go back to school. It's like 500 pages and it's small print, and maybe even more. And yeah, I mean, it's just, it's tough. I was going to suggest that we read it, but I actually don't think we should.
I can't stand
Well, first off, it's too long.
It drives me crazy.
Well, this is a philosophy podcast, cunts, aren't it? You hate it? Well, we're certainly doing political philosophy right now.
It's not a whole lot better.
You like political philosophy. Well, yeah, I don't know.
I'd much prefer to read about markets.
You do?
Yeah, right.
Well, but even that's kind of philosophy.
No, I know. It's stuff that is self-consciously philosophy. It's like we talked about. Philosophy majors are just the worst.
But anyway, I mean, the point is I did get it and I started reading it, but yeah, it's tough. But it does frame, I think, how Marcuse sees the world. I don't know.
An interesting point at the end of this essay, it's been sort of very high-minded, and then he gets into sort of comes down into lower policy area, which felt very jarring to me, but I clipped it out. So he's talking about discriminating against, like how discrimination against right-wing policy is important.
Right.
So he says such discrimination would also be applied to movements opposing the extension of social legislation to the poor, weak, disabled, as against the virulent denunciations that such a policy would do away with the sacred liberalistic principle of equality for, quote, the other side. I maintain that there are issues where there is no, quote, other side in any more than a formalistic sense, or where the other side is demonstrably regressive and impedes possible improvement of the human condition. And so to me, it's just like, it's a crazy set of assumptions to think that, like, probably most people think that the policies they're prescribing will be helpful.
Yeah, and to just completely write them off
as they're against the poor or the weak or whatever. Like I hear modern arguments, like, somebody opposes raising the minimum wage, and they're like, you don't think people should make a living wage? And it's like, I bet that's not where they're coming from. I bet they're not thinking, I don't want people to make a living wage.
Yes. Yeah, no. And in some ways, it's just... It's an alarmist and maybe or an extremist.
But I start to think there's this Dutch phrase that they always talk about on the No Agenda podcast about like what you see in other people, you're doing yourself. And I start to think that there's this idea that people who are very deceitful tend to think that everyone around the world is really deceitful. And I think I kind of see it in Marcuse where he's not really being honest. He's being shady. And so if he does something, it's secretly against some other people, even if he's not claiming it outright. And so he starts to see that as the landscape all around.
I think I would agree with that. I mean, he's an interesting character. We talked about that a little bit in the last episode, but yeah, I mean,
that's just like me reading his mind a little bit, but yeah.
But I read that too. I read an angry person.
Right.
Who is also, it's like if he's not aware of his own sort of totalitarian tendencies, then he's a little delusional, in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
So Marcuse, good, medium, bad?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there are important and good points to be gleaned from both of them, and the whole Frankfurt School. Probably, I guess I haven't read the rest of them, but I assume.
Did we read any
Eric
Adorno
Fromm seems good
in undergrad? I don't remember.
No, I mean maybe if we did, I wasn't conscious of it.
Writer.
Yeah, he was a musicologist. That's right. I think I did actually read some from Eric Fromm.
Right.
I have read some of him.
Did we have a book in music history that was edited by him, maybe? Was our source book? Remember that our secondary book?
Yes.
Is that right or is that wrong? I don't remember.
I feel like it can't be the same person.
Wait, why?
But it does kind of ring familiar. I wish I had kept those books. They were just so expensive.
Yes.
Yeah. You didn't keep them either?
No, not all of them. I kept some of them, but not those ones.
I didn't even keep the science ones. I wish I had.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I know.
The problem is also if you're moving around, they're so big and heavy. It's just like...
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the next time I move is going to be a real pain because I have so many books now.
Yeah, we got to stop getting new books.
Oh,
we should go back and finish some of the old
even,
ones that we didn't really finish.
Well, even before that, like my coping with the pandemic, I discovered Goodwill books online. It's just like Goodwill puts all the books that they have online, so it's like a really nice, cheap source of used books.
Nice.
Anyway, Yeah, this is riveting. I'm sure. Oh, what are you
I was
looking
just
up
looking
right
up
now?
his books to see if that source book we had was edited by him, but I don't know.
Oh, I see.
Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I know that Leonard Bernstein talks about him in his Harvard lectured series on music. That was kind of fun. Where Adorno's major question with music is whither music.
Wither
Yep.
music? Like W-H-I-T-H.
Yep. Whither,
Yeah.
you know, with Bernstein with his mid-Atlantic accent, you know, whither music.
Yes. This is why people hate the intelligentsia.
Why? Because they're douchebags? I mean, it's unclear what that means. I've read what does that mean several times. I still don't really get it.
Well, it's funny because, again, like that Brian McGee interview of Marcuse, they talk exactly like Marcuse, I think, even says himself he doesn't fully understand everything that he reads of Adorno.
Right. Yeah,
So-
Adorno's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the Frankfurt School. So what are we going to next?
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't think we actually. I don't know, man.
Well, so we could go opposite. We could go over to like Hoppe or Mises, or
Yeah,
we could
okay. I'd be
do
down
we could
for
do Hegel or Heidegger or
I-
Habermas or Kant.
They're gonna. I mean, Hegel's. You're gonna hate. You're gonna hate Hegel.
That's fine.
You're just absolutely gonna hate.
I mean,
him.
I hate all this stuff, so it's okay.
It would be kind of funny to make you read Hegel. I'm not gonna lie, just for my own sadistic
Yeah,
tendencies.
sure.
No, but I don't. I think. Yeah, I mean, if you have anything of Hoppe or
I mean, I feel like
Or-
Democracy, the God That Failed is probably the most fun.
yeah, that sounds interesting. I'd be down.
He also has a brief history of, I think, humankind or a brief history of humanity or something.
Oh, that's interesting too. Do you have the index of it? Like, what would be a better one for our structure? I guess.
I mean, I think Democracy, the God That Failed is the most like probing and relevant to the conversations we've been having.
Okay.
But the history of humanity is, I mean, it's interesting because it's like an Austrian philosophy version of history.
Yeah.
Starting,
But
and,
I
he, and he
guess-
talks about private property and like animal husbandry and all like the developments of all of these things and how they.
So these are both books. They're not articles, right?
Yeah, they're books.
Okay. What's yeah, okay, let's do Democracy, the God That
Okay,
Failed.
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Are you excited now?
I'm very excited.
I just want you to be excited.
You want me to be excited? I mean, you might hate it. You might. I mean, you didn't like. Who didn't you like? You didn't like Rothbard.
Yeah, I didn't like Rothbard.
And Hoppe studied with Rothbard. But he
Oh, really?
originally studied with Habermas, with Frankfurt people.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of my issues with Rothbard, though, are my issues with Marcuse. In some senses, is the academicization, as we've coined that term
Right,
now in
right.
Tushka. We've created a word to
I don't think so.
in a very ironic sense.
Yeah.
We've created our own vocabulary in opposition of the creation of vocabulary, because that's
Sure.
really evolved. Yeah. I hope people understand
Yeah.
the depths of this.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, we can move on. But yeah, anyway, yeah, so that's why I hate. So yeah, I mean, all I'm saying is that I didn't hate Rothbard, but he annoyed me for similar reasons that Marcuse annoys me.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trying to find an index for the Democracy, the God That Failed, so we can figure out
Oh, cool.
how much of it.
Sorry,
to
I
read.
can be doing this too. I'm just over here demanding you to do things.
Are you? You didn't ask me to do anything.
I did ask if you had an index.
Oh, did you? I missed it. Hans
I did
Hermann
ask.
Hoppe.
Oh, it's 2001. Wow.
I mean, he's still alive.
We got to be careful what we say.
Do we?
Well, we don't want to get sued.
Maybe we do.
That'd be kind of hilarious, though, to get sued by
It
him.
would be very fun. Yes. I think it probably he wouldn't sue us. He would just write a scathing article.
Oh, that's kind of terrifying.
He definitely, yeah. Yeah.
I'm not being sarcastic about that, too. Being eviscerated by somebody with actual stature. Not exactly what I was hoping to do. But anyway, what are we doing, though?
I mean, the chapters are kind of long.
Coming.
So I'm inclined to just start at the beginning.
Yeah, so it's about 300 pages.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think probably just the first chapter is all I'm going to get through.
Yeah, I mean, that's 45 pages.
Yep. Time preference, government, and the process of de-civilization.
Cool. Okay. Sounds good, man.
Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe we'll do the beginning and then the end again or something like that.
Yeah.
Skip all the meat in the sandwich.
Exactly, yeah. Eat
the buns.
So... Jesus Christ, Antushka. So, I agree, though. Ultimately, people do not respond to consciousness stuff.
What should I put?
Which is fine.
Week?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
They're going to get mad that it's an ad again. That's fine.
Well, honestly, you could just, you could just ask, is tolerance a partisan goal? I mean, that's an interesting question, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Or do you think most people would agree with that?
I mean, I feel like it's not probing enough. I mean, I think that generally, yes. I mean, this is where I kind of agree with Marcuse, that I think it serves the establishment.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try and think of something more probing than that.
Okay. And we had our show, and millions were there.
Millions, yes.
You may have heard about it.
You may have heard of it, yeah. Yep. Also, if any of our listeners are in Madison, I have a show on July 3rd. And if you buy tickets ahead of time, they're $5 cheaper than at the door.
Ooh.
And so I assume that everybody's going to be busting down the door to go to the show. And so I'm just letting you know you should buy tickets beforehand.
Right, and you've got somebody opening for you, right?
Yeah, two other bands on the bill.
That's cool. Where are you playing in Madison?
The Burr Oak on Winnebago Street. I like the venue. It's a cool place. I played there a couple years ago. It's a lot of fun.
Nice.
Yep.
Sweet.
They have a smoke machine on stage.
Really?
It makes a nice ambiance, you know.
Yeah. There were. Anyway, we don't have to talk about this. I don't know.
What?
There's some. Well, yeah, because the one venue that we played, the Frequency, is that where we played? Yeah, that's gone.
That was my favorite place to play. It was the perfect size.
Mm-hmm.
It was great. That was a good show. That was a fun show.
Yeah, it was.
Except you were apologizing the whole time.
Well, I apologize all the time. I mean, I apologize now. Still.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's just my shtick.
Yeah, right.
Apologizing and saying, who cares?
That's a funny mix of things.
Yeah.
All right, we did it. That's Marcuse. That's the Frankfurt School.
Yep.
Goodbye.
Yep. See ya. Okay, so
this is a response to
Reddit.
So
who is this person? Let's give him a shout out. I don't know. Should we?
Ultimar.
Okay. Thank you, Ultimar, for responding.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, good responses, thoughtful responses. But he said that for him, materialism means focused on the physical, experiential realities of the existent world with minimal theorizing or structural thinking. And then idealism is focused on the material, theoretical realities of the real world via a search for unifying structures or methods. So I think he's saying that Marcuse is an idealist rather than a materialist, because a materialist would not be structurally thinking.
You know, in some ways, I think I do agree with him that he is in the tradition of Kant and Hume, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he is also, I'm pretty sure, associated with historical materialism.
Right.
Well, or at least, I mean, he's a Marxist, or I guess he's a neo-Marxist, and this is where I just I agree with his definitions, I think, of materialism and I guess idealism. I haven't ever thought of calling it idealism, but I get what he's saying, because he's just talking in my head about the same question that everybody's been talking about in philosophy forever, is the mind-body problem. So the body is the materialist and the mind is the idealist in this sense. And again, it gets back to consciousness, where the consciousness is the idealist thought and the body is the materialist thought. And so that's kind of how I think about it, at least for whatever that's worth. As far as whether or not Marcuse is an idealist or a materialist, I don't know. I don't know if I really care. That's, I guess, what I would say.
Yeah. I agree with that. I'm more on the does it matter whether he's a materialist or not.
Yeah.
I agree, but it seems like people like to find the definition boxes that people fit in.
Right, and
it's not like I don't do it sometimes too. I think we all do it. But.
Right. Well, and you did ask him, because this was a response, you did ask him what he means by materialism. But I forget if he was saying that did you call him a materialist in your post? I can't remember.
Yes, because you said it in the last episode that you think that he's ultimately a materialist.
Well, he says, now that I'm remembering, he says he's a materialist in that interview with Brian McGee. He explicitly says that.
Right.
Now that I remember it. Yeah. So so anybody listening, go look up that interview on YouTube. I'm pretty sure he says it in that. So this is where it's like, maybe we were talking about this. Maybe he's just not completely aware of his feelings, because I kind of see what this person on Reddit's saying. At least the way I'm thinking about it is he is very idealistic, as we've said, like his idea of a almost utopian society where labor doesn't exist and everybody is a free-thinking, autonomous individual seems very you're living in the fantasy of consciousness. As you've said, he's trying to create a heaven on earth in some sense.
Right.
So, yeah. What were some of the other good responses?
Well, so he also has a response to the philosophy as consciousness, trying to understand consciousness.
Oh, yeah.
He said, I caution against speaking of philosophy in such absolute or monolithic terms. It is a concept that has been applied over the years in a variety of ways, and in my opinion, litigating the particulars of every last edge case isn't feasible, i.e., do Newton and Bohr count as philosophers still, and how rigorous is the minimum?
They do, yes.
However, I agree with your general characterization, though. Philosophy is cognitive science.
Yes. See, that's why I think we actually agree. I don't know why he or she's throwing all that other stuff in there, because it's like, I mean, by saying that last component, I think that negates everything else in my head. Because that is essentially what I'm saying, is that philosophy is just it was really the precursor to psychology, and still is a major, I mean, a lot of the ideas that we have in psychology came first from philosophy, and metaphysics was like psychology before we had psychology,
Let's see. There was a Marxist Leninist who responded. Their name is easily_swayed. Marxists use consciousness and, quote, social consciousness, I think quotes to denote a technical term, in a way close to how military people use situational awareness. Like in the war for the working class, it's how people express common sense and shared belief about world states, e.g. religion. Social consciousness develops slowly because we are fundamentally irrational creatures and over millennia must fight and experience terrible things to build up this social consciousness, kind of by force. Our enemies, the rationalist idealists, apparently believe human beings both download and apply the correct scientific models as they are discovered, and think it's some terrible error world socialism hasn't automatically happened despite all these advancements, but it is obviously because people are still learning how it's made.
Well, and isn't that interesting that they characterize the enemies as rationalist idealists?
It is interesting.
Because, I mean...
then that seems to contradict the other guy's
exactly.
idealist thing.
Yep. Whereas I would say he would say it would be the rationalist materialists, right?
Right. And this is why I don't care what people call them. What are they doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I said, thanks for your response. My main question is, how do you determine that people are fundamentally irrational? Because this is actually, I don't know how this is, how is rationality or irrationality at the baseline determined? Because how can we know that we are or are not rational?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to a very early conversation we had in the podcast, I think sparked by Foucault, about truth, because it kind of is getting at that of, because, yeah, rationality seems to be, at least when you're thinking, it's like your mental state is in line with reality. Right.
Because, like, rationality, it's hard. I like to think about the etymology sometimes, and, like, ratio, like, where did this word come to mean what it means now?
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. There? Yeah. Well, so what did they respond?
Yeah, they said rationality is correctly assessing the efficiencies and optimizations of your resources. So already I'm confused because how are we determining what the correct assessment is? Very useful, sure, but it begs the question about why slavery and other systems last so long. Given that the Romans clearly had the technology to end slavery, why didn't they? The Ottomans and the Chinese also were more advanced in some way despite intentionally continuing slavery. Certain hunter-gatherers are able to design technology, and there's no need for any theory about their economy or resources. They apparently did so through some intuition. Rationalists find these things confusing because they assume that everyone is attempting to head towards a society of perfect efficiency, rationalism, etc., and the above kind of just stopped work on this. In reality, it's probably just that people and entire societies can adapt based on their beliefs and history, even with strained resources, and there's no such thing as, say, automatic investment in labor-saving tech. So in other words, rationalists cannot explain why there are such huge differences in apparent efficiencies between this or that society. But to Marxists and other thinkers, it's not an issue at all. There is no grand competition going on other than the ones states enforce on others.
I mean, maybe, you know.
Right. I guess it's this thing, it's like if rationality is correct assessment, then it's like that's the realm of God.
Well, it's a good point. Is what do you mean by correct assessment? But I guess that could mean, you know, I'm assuming what they're kind of saying is like, you're hungry, you need food, so you correctly identify something in your environment that is food.
Right. And then it's like more rational to eat peanut butter than like a jelly bean.
Right.
Because peanut butter will keep you full longer or something.
Right. So it's rational. But so here's an interesting thing then. It's kind of getting at this idea that rationality is a little bit contextual. Because it's like, it's rational to do that in the context of wanting to survive, but it's irrational in the context of wanting to die.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I guess you could say that it's irrational to want to die.
Yeah, I don't know.
But that's my point is I guess rationality seems to be contextual to a degree.
Like, yeah, based on whatever your goals are, one thing or another might be rational.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is my favorite comment.
Oh, yeah.
This, I think, was directed at you. Everyone I've ever met who's tried to talk about consciousness was really just secretly trying to prove the existence of souls using philosophy.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but I was like, I don't know. Maybe I am. I don't. Is secretly trying to do that. It's like, is there a reason to be secretive?
It's your covert mission, man.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you want to call consciousness and the soul the same thing, sure.
And you do.
I never thought about it, honestly. It's an interesting point. Yeah.
Really? I think I've said that on the podcast.
I think you have. You're right. It's more of I haven't ever thought about it deeply because I guess I've always thought of the soul as a rather vacuous thing. It's like, it's not well defined. So I haven't thought about trying to define it very well because I thought that we have more specific words to define the thing I'm trying to define, like consciousness.
Right.
But it's a good point. Is potentially the soul is what people before they used the word consciousness referred to.
Right, because when you're dead, it's like you're gone.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Your brain, the thing that made you alive.
Right.
Because like we could get in this whole thing about how it's like, the expressivity of the face, and that's all the facial nerves and stuff like that, and
and then like if you're in a coma, are you there? It's sort of unclear.
Right.
The other term is the ghost in the machine. That's one.
Right. Well, in some cases you are there, as evidenced by people with, like in the book L. Not the book L, the book, the Diving Bell and the Butterfly, which was about the CEO of the magazine L, who had a stroke in the brainstem, and it basically caused him to lose all of his, basically all the motor function below his brainstem, but he was still cognitively intact. And so all he could do was blink, basically. And so he was still there, though. He wrote a book by blinking. So anyway, it doesn't matter. But the point is, again, I'm getting at a materialist explanation for consciousness. It's right. In some cases, when people, like before we had abilities to communicate, people might have thought he wasn't there. But he was there. And then, you have people who are in comas who say that they were there, and then you have other people who say they weren't there.
Right.
Anyway, I thought that was a funny comment too, though. But you said something back, right? Didn't you? Or did they respond?
I did, but it wasn't like.
Okay.
I didn't think that's what you were going for. I think.
Oh,
but
no.
maybe I'm wrong.
No. I guess I don't know. It's true in the way that it's written. It's almost like accusatory, like they found me out for something, but it's like I don't know if I was found out for anything. Maybe that's what I'm doing, but even if that's what I'm doing, does that devalue the process?
Right.
Maybe it does for them. They say it's maybe they think that it's a futile effort to try to prove.
I'm getting the sense that they think. So I said, not sure if that's the direction you were going in. What about the critical theory concepts of true and false consciousness, and then consciousness raising?
Yeah.
And then their response was, I see it as more of a raising awareness thing.
Right, but what is that? Consciousness is awareness.
Right.
So that's what I would say to that. Because that's the definition of consciousness is awareness of oneself and one's surroundings. By many people's definition, I should say.
Right.
Maybe it's not this person's definition, though, so fair enough. Fair enough.
I think my definition of consciousness is closer to a soul, but I think that I think awareness of self and surroundings. I think it isn't nonsense. It isn't nonsensical. It makes sense.
Well, but how about
like
this?
In cultural anthropology class in like when I was first year of college, where they talk about consciousness is I'm aware that you're aware of me, and I'm aware that you're aware that I'm aware of you. Like it's the string. It's the like very, very complex network of awareness of self and other.
Right.
And other.
So that's what I'm saying is like, isn't awareness, regardless of if you want to say it's specifically awareness of oneself and one's surroundings, awareness is part of consciousness definition for you, or the awareness is part of the soul's definition for you, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. And I bet it would be for this person too.
Right.
But anyway, who cares?
I think I'm much more in line with that idea of consciousness. I think in earlier episodes, it's gotten like, I've understood your definition of consciousness as like a network of neurons, which to me is maybe I've been misunderstanding you, because to me I would never say that's the definition of consciousness. Perhaps that's the mechanism that creates it in humans.
Yeah, no. Well, yeah, I think I've said probably consciousness is the network of neurons, and so I agree that's a little bit misleading. Because I would agree it's more of the mechanism that consciousness comes out of.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense to me than in previous conversations.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, no, I mean,
You don't have to be sorry. I'm saying
No,
I think it's cleared up for me
sorry,
a little bit.
dang it. Concern it.
Yeah.
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 Well, cool. Is that all the interesting comments?
I think so.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Well,
Redditors.
somebody was like, "This feels like an ad."
Oh, yeah, that was
a good
funny.
comment.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say to that. Like, yeah, I guess
Well,
it is.
I think I did notice, normally you put in a little disclaimer how it is an ad, and I feel like you didn't for that one. So maybe just putting another asterisk where it's like, look, this is...
I know, it's just so many things. Yes.
Sorry.
No.
You're right, though. No, you're right. I mean, it is
Part
one
of it
more
is
thing.
like,
Yeah.
I don't. It's frustrating because, you know, like when Thaddeus Russell goes on a podcast to talk about an idea, he's doing an ad too for his book, for
Sure.
his new course that he's teaching, for whatever, and that doesn't mean he's not having a legitimate conversation.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's this thing where there's nobody in podcasting, not nobody, most big people in podcasting media go on other podcasts and promote their podcast for a reason.
Yes.
And I guess it's like there's an idealism to Reddit that a lot of Reddit is not for advertising.
Yes.
It's for
Dialogue.
dialogue that isn't related to anything else.
Dialogue for the sake of dialogue. Which is kind of what we're doing right here, man. Man.
Yeah, exactly. So it's fine. So they should listen.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with you. And it's interesting because you see that with podcasts too. You're right. And late night talk shows, there's a whole etiquette to like, you wait until you're prompted to plug. Don't just come out and plug. I mean, that was a whole etiquette thing. It's like you wouldn't go on the Johnny Carson's show and just say your plug before he prompts you. It's like he's going to prompt you. I mean, unless you're a big shot.
But you're there for a reason.
Yeah, but you're there for a reason, exactly. So I think that's it, though, is I think I mean, it's just everything. In every situation, you have people who have a different definition of what etiquette is. And in that case, this person thinks that there should be nothing. But there are other people. I've seen other people within that subreddit. I think it was the critical theory subreddit, right?
Yeah.
That have said that. And then other people respond like, yeah, but like, I think this is fine, or something like that. Because I think you got that previously. Yeah.
Because this time somebody was like lamenting that it was sad that the critical theory subreddit had become like cynical transactionalism or something.
Yes, I saw that too. That was funny.
That was the same.
We're not making any money. Does that make anybody feel better? We're promoting it for nothing. I mean, it's not like we're...
Right, yeah, honestly it is for now. It's just so that I can look at the numbers and be like, ooh, that's fun.
Yeah, wow. Getting a lot of upvotes on this.
Well, I mean, downvotes are honestly
downvotes, yeah, I should say. Getting a lot of comments.
Yeah. At this point, I want to get ratioed. Like, I'm into it.
Yeah, you've got a little ratio masochism going on, you might say.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, all right, we did it again.
I think we did
it.
Yeah, cool, see ya. All right.